Please remain seated. The show will begin in 3, 2...
Like a Hellcat. For more awesome content, like and subscribe now.
Hi, before we start this story, I'd like to tell you about Blue's Clues, in case you're living under a rock. Blue's Clues is a show for young children that was created in 1996 and lasted for 10 years with a total of 6 seasons and 141 episodes. The show involves Steve or Joe looking for clues and solving mysteries with help from the audience. Blue was an animated dog who labeled the clues with her paw prints. It was October 25th, 2017, and we were moving into a new house. While my mom and dad were unpacking, I decided to do some exploring in the attic. I found an old box. To my surprise, it was filled with a bunch of old VHS tapes. All of them were Blue's Clues tapes. The one tape I found just had a regular sticker, not a factory sticker like the other tapes had. The title on the sticker was Blue's Clues, Sorrow. I thought the title was a little strange, but I figured it was just a copy of the Steve Goes to College episode, the one where Steve goes off to college and Joe takes his place. Because Steve said goodbye to all of his friends in that episode, I considered it to be very sorrowful indeed. I figured it was the perfect opportunity to check out the tape. Our TV has a VCR, and I have to admit, I felt a tingle of excitement when I placed the tape in the player. I was about to relive my childhood memories of watching Blue's Clues. I didn't care that I was too old to watch it. I knew for sure that I would enjoy it. At least, that's what I thought. The episode started off with the usual opening sequence. The front door opened, and Steve was in the living room, looking concerned. I need to tell you something important. Blue is at the vet, and she's having an operation on her heart. I hope she's okay. Steve stopped talking and looked down at the floor. The scene ended. The next scene started with a title card saying that a month had passed after Blue's funeral. A deep voice then spoke.
There are 5 stages in the grieving process: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Steve will experience 3 stages all at once: depression, anger, and mental illness.
Steve was in his bedroom, lying in bed. He began to cry, and the color of the episode turned black and white, like a depressing old photograph. Steve cried so hard, his breathing grew shallow. The next scene showed Steve sitting up on his bed. He began crying, but his face was now red and his teeth were clenched tightly. Steve held his stuffed anteater horse with both hands. He screamed, "Blue!" at the top of his lungs. His scream sent chills down my spine. Steve ripped off Horace's head, and black ooze squirted out from the stuffed animal's neck. Steve threw Horace in a fit of rage. When the anteater landed, its ooze completely covered the floor. I fought the urge to vomit. Against my better judgment, I decided to keep watching. Steve's body began to turn to a darker and darker color by the second. After about 5 seconds, Steve turned completely black. He got up out of bed, walked out of the bedroom, and walked into his living room. I thought he was going to sit in the thinking chair, but he didn't. He stood in front of the chair and stared at the screen for a full minute. His eyes lost their pupils and became nothing more than white dots. He started crying again, and white tears streamed down his face. Some sad piano music began to play. The music was so heartbreaking I shed a few tears myself. A message flashed across the screen. It said, "You can figure out Blue's Clues, but you can't figure out insanity." The scene ended. The next scene showed Steve still standing in the living room. He was no longer crying, and his body was completely normal color. "I can't live without Blue," he said. "She was my best friend. She gave my life happiness and meaning. Without her, I have nothing to live for." The kids in the background that helped Steve find the clue started to cry and whimper. They shouted, "Please don't do it, Steve. We love you. We're your friends too." "I'm sorry," Steve said. "I'm sorry if I break your hearts for doing this, but I have no choice. Goodbye." He held up a container. The camera zoomed in on the label, which said potassium cyanide. Steve had a calm look on his face as he swallowed the contents of the container. He instantly collapsed onto the carpet. He foamed at the mouth while his body twitched and thrashed on the floor like he was being electrocuted. Steve eventually stopped moving, and I knew he was dead. The episode finally ended with a Nickelodeon logo. It shaped as a lighter for a few seconds as my TV cut to static. I sat still, dazed. It took my brain a few minutes to comprehend what I had just watched. I made the decision then and there to play detective and find out where in the world this episode came from. I looked up the name of the episode online, but came up with nothing. I knew that the company Viacom owned Blue's Clues, because their company name was shown on the factory stickers of the other VHS tapes. After a bit of research, I wrote a letter to the Viacom headquarters. I told them about my experience and asked them if they knew where the tape came from. 2 weeks later, I got a reply in the mail. "Dear Jonah Michael Abreu, thank you for taking the time to write to us. We were quite surprised by your story about the unaired episode of Blue's Clues that you discovered. We are grateful that you contacted us concerning it. We can personally assure you that Viacom Media Networks, as well as Viacom, claims no ownership or liability whatsoever regarding the episode. However, we still feel that an explanation is in order. Unfortunately, we are unable to provide details of the tape's creation, as we simply don't know how this happened. Back in 2002, we received a VHS tape in a package with no return address. The words Mr. Ted were written on the package. Along with the tape, there was a letter from Mr. Ted stating that he was the biggest fan of Blue's Clues and asked us for our approval to air his fan-made creation on television. We were quite flattered that a fan would send us a fan-made episode for airing. However, when our editors viewed the episode for refinement, they were quite appalled by its nature. A few of the staff who viewed the episode unbelievably went into shock and had to be transported to the emergency room immediately. Due to the horrifying content, we had absolutely no plans to air this episode. We passed the tape to a private collector, but we were dismayed to discover that he had many copies made. We ask that you please do not release the contents of the tape or this letter to the public, as we do not want to upset the viewers who love and support our shows for young children. With warm regards, Jonah M. Abreu, Executive Vice President, General Counsel, and Secretary. Questions bounced around inside my head, and they still do this to this day. Who is Mr. Ted? How is he able to create this demonic episode? Is he even well human? Out of respect for Viacom, I'm afraid I cannot provide any footage. However, I figured releasing a single screenshot and a copy of the letter to the public, who will perhaps maybe it wouldn't make them too angry. You're probably wondering, why are you telling me this? What's the point of the story? To be honest, I just wanted to get it off my chest. I kept it a secret for a little while, but I eventually felt the desire to tell someone, whether they believe me or not. A part of my brain told me to throw away the tape and the letter, but I have kept both in my closet to remind me of what I had experienced, which was definitely real. I now realize that some so-called fans of the TV shows, well, perhaps, are not as normal as you might think they are.